The earth trembled beneath Lily Jensen's feet as she reached for another sample of ore deep within the Sierra Nevada Mining Company's newest shaft. The silver vein glittered with promise in the flickering lantern light until a deafening crack shattered the stillness, and the mountain began to swallow her whole. Nevada Territory, 1868. Lily had never intended to end up in the mining business. At 23, she was an anomaly in Riverton, Nevada, a woman who preferred geology textbooks to gossip and trousers to petticoats when the situation called for it. Her father had left her his small claim after succumbing to mountain fever last winter, and with no other family or prospects, she'd thrown herself into learning every aspect of the trade. "Miss Jensen, you shouldn't be down here," Martin Collins, the foreman, had warned her that morning. "These new tunnels ain't been properly timbered yet." "I'll be quick, Mr. Collins," Lily had replied, adjusting her leather satchel. "I just need to verify the concentration before we proceed further. Father always said to trust the rock, not the rumors." Her scientific approach had earned grudging respect from some of the miners and outright derision from others. But Lily couldn't afford to sell her claim without knowing its true value, not in a town where unattached women had precious, few respectable options. Now, as the support beams splintered and the earth roared around her, those concerns seemed trivial. Lily scrambled backward as rocks pelted her shoulders, dust choking her lungs. She dropped her satchel, abandoning her precious samples as survival instinct took over. 20 feet to the main shaft. 15, 10. The mountain had other plans. A massive tremor knocked her sideways. Her lantern crashed against the wall, flames licking briefly at the timber before darkness swallowed everything. The last thing Lily remembered was throwing her arms over her head as the ceiling gave way. Garrett Preston pushed his hat back and squinted at the sun, calculating the distance to Riverton. His Palomino stallion nickered impatiently beneath him, eager to reach town after the long journey from Colorado. At 28, Garrett had spent the better part of a decade drifting from one mining town to another, following rumors of strikes and opportunities. "Patience, Thunder," he murmured, patting the horse's neck. "Few more hours and you'll have a proper stable and oats." The road stretched before him, winding through scrubby pines and rocky outcroppings. Garrett had heard talk of the Sierra Nevada mines striking a promising vein, and with his experience as both a miner and occasional hired gun, he figured Riverton might offer steady work for a while. He'd learned long ago not to put down roots. His mother had died when he was 12, and his father's gambling had cost them their Texas ranch by the time Garrett turned 16. Since then, he'd made his own way, carrying little more than his Winchester rifle, his father's pocket watch, and an increasingly worn map of mining territories throughout the West. As Riverton came into view, a collection of wooden buildings sprawled alongside a modest river. Garrett noticed unusual activity near the edge of town. A crowd had gathered, and even from a distance, the urgency in their movements was apparent. "Looks like trouble, boy," he told Thunder, urging the horse to a faster pace. By the time he reached the outskirts, Garrett could make out shouts and the unmistakable sound of panic. A group of dust-covered men clustered around what appeared to be a mine entrance, while others rushed back and forth with equipment. He dismounted near a water trough, where an old-timer was filling canteens. "What's happened?" Garrett asked, loosening Thunder's saddle. The old man looked up, eyes red-rimmed from dust or emotion, possibly both. "Cave-in at the Sierra Nevada. Happened about 2 hours ago. Got most of the boys out, but Collins says the Jensen girl's still trapped in the north shaft." "Jensen girl," Garrett frowned, trying to make sense of it. "There's a woman down there, Lily Jensen. Her pa left her a stake in the mine. Stubborn thing's been trying to run it herself instead of selling out like any sensible woman would." The old-timer spat tobacco juice into the dirt. She was taking samples when the supports gave way. Garrett's gaze traveled to the mine entrance, where men were arguing loudly about the best approach. Without conscious decision, he found himself moving toward them, Thunder's reins still in hand. "Can't risk more men," a thick-set man in a vest was saying. "That whole section's unstable. We'd just be adding bodies to recover. So we just leave her," countered a younger miner, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. Collins, you know as well as I do she's got air in that pocket if she survived the initial fall. And how do you propose we reach her, Sam? That shaft's completely blocked. We'd need to dig a new tunnel, and that takes time we don't have. What about coming in from above? Garrett found himself asking, stepping into their circle. The men turned to look at the newcomer, taking in his trail-worn clothes and the confident set of his shoulders. Who might you be? The foreman Collins asked suspiciously. Garrett Preston. I've worked mines from Colorado to California. Helped with rescue operations after a collapse in Leadville last year. He pointed toward the hillside. If you've got a map of the tunnels, we could calculate where she might be trapped and sink a shaft from above. Collins studied him, then nodded curtly. I've got survey maps in the office. But I ain't sending my men in on a fool's errand. I'm not asking you to, Garrett replied. Just need some equipment and a few volunteers. Something about the stranger's steady gaze and quiet confidence shifted the mood of the group. Sam stepped forward. I'll help. Lily's a good sort. Saved my job when production was down last month. 2 more men volunteered, and Collins reluctantly agreed to show Garrett the maps while the others gathered equipment. In the company office, little more than a shack with a desk and filing cabinet, Collins unfurled detailed drawings of the mine's layout. She was here, he said, jabbing a blunt finger at the north shaft. About 300 feet in. We heard the collapse from the main tunnel, but everything east of this support beam came down. Garrett studied the map, visualizing the mountain's contours and the network of tunnels beneath it. If she was here when it happened, and assuming the collapse pushed inward. He traced a path with his finger. She could be in this pocket. The question is whether there's enough air. If anyone could find a way to survive, it'd be Lily, said a voice from the doorway. A woman in her 40s, dressed in a shopkeeper's apron, stood with red-rimmed eyes. She's too stubborn to die in that hole, Collins sighed. Mrs. Palmer, you shouldn't be here. Where else would I be when Lily's trapped? That girl's been like a daughter since her father passed. She turned to Garrett. You think you can reach her? Garrett met her desperate hope with careful honesty. I can try, madam, but I need to know more about the surrounding rock formation. Is it mostly granite, shale? Granite mostly with quartz veins, Collins answered. The silver runs alongside those veins. Garrett nodded, calculations running through his mind. Stable enough to tunnel through if we're careful. We'll need to bring drilling equipment to the coordinates I'll mark. He pointed to a spot on the map. And timber for supports, lots of it. I'll have the boys bring everything up, Collins said, his initial skepticism giving way to cautious cooperation. But Preston, if that section shifts again while you're digging. I know the risks. Garrett rolled up the map. Let's not waste daylight. Within the hour, Garrett found himself climbing the backside of the mountain, leading a small team with mules carrying equipment. He'd shed his coat and gun belt, now dressed in borrowed mining clothes. The spot he'd calculated would provide the shortest route to where Lily might be trapped, while avoiding the unstable, collapsed section. You really think she could still be alive down there? Asked Sam as they reached the marker Garrett had placed earlier. People have survived worse, Garrett replied, though he kept his doubts to himself. The rock might have created air pockets. If she wasn't crushed in the initial collapse, she'd have a chance if we reach her in time. They unloaded drills, picks, shovels, and timber supports. Garrett marked a 6-foot circle and assigned positions. We dig in shifts, 4 men working, 4 resting, steady pace, no rushing that might trigger another collapse. As the first drill bit into stone, Garrett found himself wondering about the woman trapped below. What kind of person was Lily Jensen, to brave a mine alone in a world that expected women to stay above ground and preferably in kitchens? He'd met female prospectors before, usually weathered widows partnered with equally weathered husbands, but never a young woman running operations herself. He pushed the thoughts aside. Speculation wouldn't help them reach her any faster, and time was the enemy now. Darkness fell, but lanterns were lit, and the work continued. They'd made it 10 feet down when the first shift ended. Garrett's shoulders ached as he climbed out of the developing shaft to drink from a canteen. The night air felt blessedly cool after the exertion. You think we'll reach her by morning? Sam asked, joining him. Garrett shook his head. We're looking at a good 60 feet of solid rock. Even with the drills, I'd estimate 2 full days, maybe 3. She won't have water down there. No, Garrett agreed grimly. She won't. They continued through the night, rotating shifts every 4 hours. By dawn, they'd reached 20 feet, their progress slowed by increasingly harder stone. Garrett's hands were blistered despite his gloves, and every muscle protested as he drove the drill deeper. But each foot they descended rekindled hope that they might reach Lily in time. Meanwhile, below the mountain, Lily Jensen was fighting her own battle. She'd regained consciousness to absolute darkness and crushing weight across her legs. Panicked, she'd clawed at the debris until her fingers bled, but managed to free herself. Her lantern was shattered, but the small tin of matches in her pocket had survived. The brief flame of a match revealed her situation. She was trapped in a section of tunnel about 8 feet long and 6 feet wide, with solid rock walls on 3 sides and a mass of collapsed debris on the 4th. Her initial relief at being alive quickly gave way to the grim reality of her predicament. She had no water, no food, and her left ankle throbbed painfully when she tried to put weight on it. But Lily had grown up hearing her father's mining stories, including those of men who survived cave-ins by staying calm and conserving energy. "Think, Lily," she whispered to herself, her voice oddly flat in the enclosed space. "Assess the situation." She struck another match, carefully examining her prison. The ceiling appeared stable, supported by a massive granite slab that had fallen at an angle, creating the pocket that saved her life. The air was dusty but breathable. She had 12 matches left. Lily tore a strip from her petticoat and bound her ankle as tightly as she could bear. Then she settled against the wall, determined to remain calm and ration her strength. They would be looking for her. Martin Collins wouldn't abandon a miner, even when he thought had no business underground. Hours passed in darkness. Lily counted seconds, then minutes, trying to maintain some sense of time. She dozed fitfully, startling awake at the smallest sounds, the settling of debris, the distant creak of timber. Thirst became her constant companion, her throat parched and tongue swelling. By what she estimated to be the second day, hallucinations began. She heard her father's voice calling from beyond the rubble, felt phantom rain on her face. Rational thought became harder to maintain. "They're coming," she told herself hoarsely. "They have to be coming." Above, Garrett and his team had reached 40 feet by midday of the second day. Progress had slowed as the granite became more unyielding, but they'd established an efficient system, drilling, clearing debris, setting supports, then repeating the cycle. Men from town had formed a chain to haul up baskets of rock and deliver supplies. Garrett hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch since they began. His body moved mechanically now, driven by stubborn determination rather than strength. Every time he considered resting, he imagined the woman below, waiting in darkness, possibly injured, definitely without water for over 48 hours. "Preston, you need to rest," Collins told him as the sun began to set on the second day. "You're no good to her if you collapse yourself." Garrett wiped sweat from his brow, leaving a streak of dirt. "I'll rest when we break through." "That could be another day at this rate," Sam pointed out, concern evident in his voice. "The rock's getting harder the deeper we go." "Then we need more men on the drills," Garrett replied, reaching for a canteen. He drank deeply, thinking of Lily's thirst. "Rotate faster so no one gets too tired." They continued through the second night, the monotonous rhythm of the drills accompanied by the grunts of exertion and occasional curses when the bit struck particularly resistant stone. Garrett lost track of time, focused solely on measuring their progress, 45 feet, 50, 55. Dawn broke on the third day with renewed energy as they neared what Garrett estimated was their target depth. The entire town seemed to hold its breath as the drilling continued, people gathering at the improvised shaft, waiting for news. "If she's there, we should be nearly on top of her position," Garrett told Collins during a brief break. His voice was raspy from dust and exhaustion. "But we need to be careful breaking through if there's unstable debris on her side." Collins nodded grimly. "I've seen rescue attempts that killed the trapped miners when the last bit of rock gave way wrong." Around noon, Just as Garrett was preparing to descend for another shift, one of the miners shouted from below, "There's a change in the rock. I think we're hitting a hollow space." Garrett scrambled down the ladder they'd constructed, heart pounding with renewed hope. At the bottom, he could see what had excited the miner. The drill had suddenly pushed through several inches with minimal resistance. "Everyone out except Sam and me," Garrett ordered. "If there's a pocket of bad air or unstable ground, no sense risking more lives." The others reluctantly climbed out while Garrett took up a smaller hand drill and carefully widened the opening. After several tense minutes, he had created a hole about 4 inches across. "Miss Jensen." He called through the opening. "Lily Jensen, can you hear me?" Silence answered him. "Try again," Sam urged. "Lily," Garrett called louder. "If you're down there, give us a sign." They waited, straining to hear any response. Just as Garrett was about to call again, the faintest sound came through the opening, a scraping noise, followed by what might have been a voice. "She's alive," Sam exclaimed. Garrett pressed his ear to the hole. "Miss Jensen, if you can hear me, we're coming to get you. We need to widen this opening. Stay back from this wall if you can." They worked with renewed urgency, carefully enlarging the hole until it was wide enough for a man to pass through. Throughout the process, they called down periodically, but received no further response. Finally, Garrett tied a rope around his waist and prepared to enter the opening. "If I tug twice, pull me back immediately," he told Sam. "It could still collapse." With a lantern in one hand, Garrett eased himself through the hole, dropping about 4 feet onto uneven ground. The lantern illuminated a small pocket in the rock and huddled against the far wall, a motionless figure. "Lily," he breathed, scrambling across the debris. She was alive but barely conscious, her clothes torn and filthy, dried blood on her hands and face. When he touched her cheek, her eyelids fluttered. "Water," she whispered, the word barely audible. Garrett uncorked his canteen and gently lifted it to her cracked lips. "Small sips," he cautioned. "Too much at once will make you sick." Her hands came up weakly to clutch at the canteen, and he had to restrain her from drinking too quickly. After a few sips, some awareness returned to her eyes and she focused on his face. "Who?" she managed. "Garrett Preston, madam. Folks above have been mighty worried about you." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Knew they'd come. Can you move? Are you injured?" he asked, quickly assessing her condition. Her left ankle was crudely bandaged, and she was filthy and dehydrated, but remarkably intact considering her ordeal. "Ankle," she said, taking another careful sip. "Not broken, I think, just very weak." "I'm going to get you out of here," Garrett told her, "but I need to check the stability of this pocket first. Rest a moment." He examined the surrounding rock, relieved to find that their drilling hadn't destabilized the precarious balance that had kept Lily alive. The granite slab overhead seemed secure for now, though he wouldn't want to test it for long. Returning to her side, he helped her take another drink. "Miss Jensen, I'm going to carry you back through the opening we made. It's about 60 feet straight up to the surface. The men will pull us up with ropes." She nodded weakly. 3 days. "Yes, madam, you've been down here 3 days. Her eyes widened slightly at this confirmation, then she set her jaw with determination. "I'm ready." Garrett wrapped her in his jacket, then lifted her as gently as possible. She was lighter than he expected, though still a substantial burden for a man who'd been working without rest for nearly 3 days straight. He carried her to the opening, where Sam's anxious face appeared. "She's alive," Garrett called up. "Get the harness ready." With careful maneuvering, they secured Lily in a makeshift harness, and the men above began to pull. Garrett stayed below, steadying her as she rose through the opening, ensuring she didn't strike against the sides. "Ready for you now, Preston," Sam called down once Lily was safely extracted. Garrett tied the rope around himself and began the ascent, his muscles screaming in protest as he helped the process by climbing the rough walls where possible. When he finally emerged into daylight, the scene that greeted him was one of controlled jubilation. Lily lay on a stretcher, already being tended by the town doctor, while a crowd of townspeople looked on with tears and smiles of relief. Mrs. Palmer knelt beside Lily, stroking her hair and murmuring words of comfort. Collins stood nearby, his usual gruff expression softened by genuine emotion. Garrett dragged himself from the hole and collapsed onto the ground, suddenly aware of how utterly spent he was. "You did it, Preston," Collins said, offering a hand to help him up. "Never seen anything like it." Garrett accepted the help, rising unsteadily to his feet. "She's tougher than granite," he said, looking over at Lily. "Most would have given up." "That's our Lily, Mrs. Palmer said, overhearing as she approached. She took Garrett's dirt-streaked hand in both of hers. "There aren't words enough to thank you, Mr. Preston. You've saved our girl." Before Garrett could respond, the doctor interrupted. "We need to get her down to town. She's severely dehydrated, and that ankle needs proper attention." As they prepared to transport Lily down the mountain, her eyes sought Garrett through the crowd. When their gazes met, something passed between them, a connection forged in crisis, a shared experience that set them apart from everyone around them. She raised a weak hand, and without thinking, Garrett moved to her side and took it. "Thank you," she whispered. "Just doing what needed doing," he replied softly. "Rest now. We'll talk when you're stronger." As the men carried her stretcher toward town, Garrett found himself following, drawn by a force he couldn't name and was too exhausted to question. He collected thunder from where he'd been stabled and rode alongside the procession, determined to see this through to the end. Lily spent the next week recovering in Mrs. Palmer's spare bedroom above the general store. Her physical injuries were relatively minor: a sprained ankle, cuts and bruises, severe dehydration, but the psychological impact of her ordeal manifested in nightmares and moments of panic when the lamps were extinguished. Garrett, having intended to stay only long enough to ensure she was recovering, found reasons to remain in Riverton. First, it was his own exhaustion, then an offer from Collins to help assess the mine's safety before operations resumed. He took a room at the modest hotel and spent his days between the mine and casual visits to check on Lily's progress. "She's asking for you," Mrs. Palmer told him one evening as he stopped by the store. "Says she wants to properly thank the man who dug her out of that mountain." Garrett found himself uncharacteristically nervous as he climbed the stairs to Lily's room. He removed his hat, ran a hand through his hair, and knocked softly. "Come in," called a voice stronger than the last time he'd heard it. Lily was sitting up in bed, her auburn hair falling loose around shoulders, clad in a modest nightgown and shawl. Her face had regained some color, though shadows still lingered beneath her green eyes. Those eyes widened slightly as Garrett entered, as if she was seeing him clearly for the first time. "Mr. Preston," she said, a smile warming her features. "I was beginning to think you were avoiding me." "Not at all, Miss Jensen." He remained standing awkwardly near the door. "Just wanted to give you time to recover, and I've been helping Collins evaluate the mine, so I've heard." She gestured to a chair beside the bed. "Please sit. Mrs. Palmer says you're quite the hero around town." Garrett took the offered seat, setting his hat on his knee. "People exaggerate." "Do they?" Lily tilted her head, studying him. "From what I understand, you organized the rescue, calculated where I'd be trapped, and led a 3-day drilling operation with barely any rest." Her voice softened. "And you were the one who came through that hole to get me." "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said firmly. "They wouldn't. Martin Collins told me they were ready to give up before you arrived." She reached out hesitantly, then placed her hand on his arm. "You saved my life, Mr. Preston. I won't forget that." The simple touch sent an unexpected warmth through Garrett's tired frame. He looked down at her hand, then back to her face. "Garrett," he said, "if we're going to be friends, you might as well use my given name." "Garrett," she repeated with a smile, "and I'm Lily, of course." Their conversation flowed more easily after that. Garrett told her about his years of mining experience, his travels from Colorado to California. Lily shared stories of growing up with her father, learning geology and mineralogy from his books, and her determination to make the mine profitable after his death. "Most women would have sold the claim," Garrett observed. "Most women haven't spent their lives watching their fathers love the earth more than anything," she replied without bitterness. "The mine is all I have left of him. And besides," she added with a glint in her eye, "I'm actually quite good at identifying profitable veins." "That's what I was doing when—" Her voice faltered, the memory of the collapse momentarily overwhelming her. Garrett instinctively took her hand. You don't have to talk about it. She squeezed his hand gratefully. Sometimes I think I'll never go underground again. Then I remind myself that fear is a poor advisor. She met his gaze steadily. I won't let it defeat me, I just might need time. Time heals most things, Garrett agreed, though he was thinking of wounds that had never fully closed in his own life. As the days passed, Lily's strength returned. She began walking with a cane, first around Mrs. Palmer's rooms, then venturing outside for short periods. Garrett often accompanied her on these excursions, offering his arm for support when the boardwalks became uneven. Riverton observed their growing friendship with interest. Gossip inevitably followed the mine owner's daughter, and the drifter who'd saved her life made for compelling speculation. Garrett ignored the whispers, conscious only of the strange contentment he felt in Lily's company. For her part, Lily found herself looking forward to their daily walks with an anticipation that surprised her. She'd never given much thought to romance, focused as she'd been on proving herself in a man's world. But Garrett treated her with a respect that acknowledged both her independence and her femininity. 2 weeks after the rescue, Lily insisted on visiting the mine. I need to see it, she told Garrett as they walked slowly toward the site. I can't move forward until I face it. Garrett understood, though concern creased his brow. Collins says they've reinforced the main shaft, but the north tunnel where you were trapped is still closed off. Good, she said with a shudder. I don't think I could bear to see that particular section again. They approached the mine entrance, where workers tipped their hats respectfully to Lily. Collins emerged from the office shack, surprise evident on his weathered face. Miss Jensen, didn't expect to see you up here so soon. I needed to come, she replied simply. How are the repairs progressing? Collins launched into a detailed explanation of the reinforcement work, with Garrett occasionally adding technical observations. Lily listened intently, asking pointed questions that revealed her knowledge of mining operations. What about the silver vein I was examining when? She hesitated, then pressed on. When the collapse occurred, Collins and Garrett exchanged glances. We haven't gotten back to that section yet, Collins admitted, but from the samples we recovered. He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. They were diluted, Garrett finished for him. The concentration isn't as high as initial reports suggested. Lily absorbed this news silently, her expression unreadable. May I see the assay results? In the office, Collins produced the paperwork. Lily studied the figures, her shoulders gradually slumping. This can't be right, she murmured. The samples I collected showed at least twice this concentration. Could be the vein pinched out, Collins suggested gently. Happens all the time in these mountains. Or the assayer made a mistake, Garrett added, not liking the defeated look in Lily's eyes. She shook her head. I need to see for myself. Not today, she added, noting their alarmed expressions. But soon, once the tunnel is safe. They walked back to town in silence, Lily lost in thought and Garrett respecting her need to process this new setback. At the door to Mrs. Palmer's store, she finally spoke. If the silver vein is truly played out, I don't know what I'll do. I've invested everything, my savings, my future in making this mine work. Garrett weighed his words carefully. There might be other options, other veins to explore. With what capital? She gave a bitter laugh. The investors were already hesitant to back a female mine owner after this collapse and poor assay results. You're not alone in this, Lily, he said quietly. I might have some ideas. She looked up at him, vulnerability and hope mingling in her expression. Why would you help me? You barely know me. The question caught him off guard. Why indeed? He'd spent years avoiding entanglements, moving on whenever a place or situation threatened to hold him too firmly. Yet here he was, already planning ways to help this woman secure her future in Riverton. I know enough, he said finally. I know you're brave, resourceful, and determined. Those are qualities worth supporting. Something shifted in her gaze, a recognition, perhaps, of feelings neither had acknowledged. Thank you, she said softly, for everything. That evening, unable to sleep despite his physical exhaustion, Garrett sat in the hotel's small common room, nursing a whiskey and contemplating his situation. The logical course would be to move on. Riverton's mine offered limited prospects, and there were rumors of better opportunities in Montana. Yet the thought of leaving left him unaccountably hollow. Mind if I join you? Samuel Evans, one of the miners who'd helped with the rescue, pulled out a chair across from Garrett. "Free country," Garrett replied, gesturing to the empty seat. Sam signaled to the bartender for a drink. "So you sticking around Riverton?" "Haven't decided yet. Seems to me you might have reason to." Sam's tone was casual, but his meaning clear. "Miss Jensen's taken quite a shine to you." Garrett took another sip of whiskey. "We've been through something intense together. Creates a bond." "Sure does." Sam accepted his drink from the bartender. "Know what else I think? I think that Silver Vein isn't as played out as Collins believes." This caught Garrett's full attention. "What makes you say that?" Sam leaned forward. "I've been working that mine 5 years. Lily's pa, old man Jensen, he taught me to read the rock. Before he died, he told me he'd found signs of a major vein running parallel to the one they'd been working. Said it was his insurance policy. Did he tell Lily? Don't think so. He was a private man, especially after his health started failing." Sam took a long swallow of his drink. "But I helped him take some samples from a small exploratory shaft. Richest silver ore I've ever seen. Never found out exactly where he hid those samples, though." Garrett's mind raced with possibilities. "Why are you telling me this?" Sam studied him for a moment. "Because I like Lily. She's fair to us miners, doesn't cut corners on safety like some owners, and because you broke your back to save her when others were ready to write her off." He stood, leaving his half-finished drink. "Just thought you should know there might be more to that mine than current assays suggest." After Sam left, Garrett sat for a long time, turning this new information over in his mind. If there truly was another vein, a richer one, it could change everything for Lily's prospects. But finding it would require capital and time, both in short supply, unless he provided them. The realization that he was seriously considering investing his hard-earned savings in Lily's mine struck Garrett like a physical blow. It went against every lesson of self-preservation he'd taught himself since watching his father gamble away their ranch. Yet when he imagined Lily's face lighting up with renewed hope, the risk seemed suddenly worth taking. The next morning, Garrett rode out to the mine early, determined to investigate Sam's claim before discussing it with Lily. Collins was already there, reviewing timber orders with a supplier. "Preston," he greeted with a nod. "Didn't expect to see you here today. Wanted to look at some of the old survey maps again," Garrett replied casually. "Been thinking about the geology of this area." Collins raised an eyebrow but led him to the office without comment. Once alone with the maps, Garrett examined them carefully, looking for any indication of the parallel veins Sam had mentioned. There was nothing obvious, but he noticed something interesting: several small notations in the margins, written in a cramped hand different from the surveyor's flowing script. Coordinates, possibly, and a series of numbers that might be dates. Garrett copied them into his notebook, then examined the most recent survey of the collapsed section. If his hunch was correct, Jensen's insurance policy might lie just beyond where Lily had been taking samples when the cave-in occurred. Armed with this theory, Garrett sought out Sam, who was working the day shift. "Those notations there in Jensen's hand?" he asked without preamble. Sam glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Looks like it. He was secretive toward the end, afraid someone would jump his claim if word got out about the new vein." "I need to see where he was taking those samples." Sam hesitated. "That section's still unstable." "I'm not suggesting we go in through the collapsed tunnel, but if we could get close enough from another approach, maybe verify the rock formation." After some persuasion, Sam agreed to show Garrett an older shaft that might provide access to the area near Jensen's secret exploration. They waited until the lunch break, when most miners returned to town, then entered the secondary tunnel with lanterns and basic tools. The passage was narrow and less well-maintained than the main shafts, clearly not part of the regular mining operation. After about 10 minutes of careful progress, Sam stopped. "Should be approximately here," he said, holding his lantern to the wall. "Jensen had me break through this section, but we covered it up after taking the samples." Garrett examined the wall carefully, eventually finding slight discoloration where the rock had been disturbed and replaced. With Sam's help, he removed several stones to reveal a small cavity beyond. "Hand me the lantern," Garrett said, his pulse quickening. The narrow beam illuminated a sight that confirmed his suspicions, a gleaming vein of ore running through the quartz, far richer than anything they'd seen in the main shaft. Garrett chipped off a small sample and held it to the light. "This is it," he breathed. "Jensen's insurance policy." "Worth developing?" Sam asked, though the answer was written on Garrett's face. "Worth everything." Garrett replaced the stones carefully, concealing their discovery. "But we need to handle this right. Lily needs to be the one to officially find this." Sam nodded in understanding. A lucky discovery by the owner would raise fewer questions than a drifter suddenly revealing a rich vein. Exactly, and she needs this win to prove herself and secure her future. They made their way back to the mine entrance, agreeing to keep their discovery secret for now. Garrett needed time to develop a plan that would benefit Lily without raising suspicions or attracting unwanted attention from larger mining interests that might try to pressure her into selling. That afternoon, he found Lily sitting on the porch of Mrs. Palmer's store, a ledger open on her lap and a troubled expression on her face. "Balancing the books?" he asked, taking a seat beside her. She sighed, closing the ledger. "Trying to. The numbers keep getting worse." She looked up at him, vulnerability evident in her eyes. "I may have to consider selling after all. Don't make any decisions yet," Garrett said. "I've been studying the mine's geology, and I have a theory about where your father might have been exploring before he passed." Hope flickered across her face. "What kind of theory?" "There are indications of another vein system running parallel to the one you've been working. It might be worth investigating before you consider selling." "Based on what evidence?" Lily asked, her scientific mind immediately seeking facts. Garrett chose his words carefully. "Some notations on the old surveys that don't match the official exploration records, and the rock formations I've observed suggest favorable conditions for a secondary vein." She considered this, doubt warring with hope in her expression. "Exploring new tunnels requires capital I don't have." "I do," Garrett said simply. Lily stared at him. "You'd invest in my mine after what happened. I believe in the potential. And in you," he added silently. "I've saved a fair amount over the years, enough to fund a small exploratory shaft if we do the work ourselves, as partners." She asked cautiously. "As partners," he confirmed. "Equal share in whatever we find." Lily studied him, seeming to search for hidden motives. "Why would you do this? You could take your savings to any established mine with less risk." Garrett met her gaze steadily. "Maybe I'm tired of drifting. Maybe I've found something in Riverton worth staying for." The air between them charged with unspoken meaning. Lily's cheeks flushed slightly, but she held his gaze. "If we're to be partners, we should formalize the arrangement. I'll have papers drawn up." "Fair enough." Garrett stood, offering his hand to help her up. "Shall we go look at those maps together? I'd like to show you what I've found." Their partnership was formed with surprising ease, the paperwork handled by Riverton's only lawyer, a thorough man named Edwards who ensured both parties' interests were protected. Garrett contributed his savings for equipment and labor, while Lily provided the existing claim and her expertise. They would split any profits equally after expenses. Work began on the exploratory shaft within days. To avoid arousing suspicion, they presented it as a safety measure, creating an alternative escape route from the main tunnels. Only Sam and 2 trusted miners were brought into the secret, sworn to silence with promises of bonuses if the new vein proved profitable. As they worked, Garrett found himself increasingly drawn to Lily's company beyond their business relationship. Their conversations ranged from practical mining concerns to personal philosophies, revealing a compatibility that surprised them both. Lily's scientific mind complemented Garrett's practical experience. His steady temperament balanced her occasional impetuosity. A month into their partnership, they were making good progress on the new tunnel. Lily had gradually overcome her fear of going underground, though she still preferred to remain near the entrance rather than venture deep into the mountain. On this particular day, however, Garrett had convinced her to come further in to examine a promising rock formation. "See how the quartz changes here," he said, holding his lantern to the tunnel wall. "It's exactly the pattern your father noted in his journals." Lily moved closer, her shoulder brushing against his as she leaned in to study the stone. "You're right. And look, there are trace minerals here that often accompany silver deposits." Her face, illuminated by the lantern's glow, showed the excitement of scientific discovery rather than fear of their surroundings. Garrett found himself watching her expression instead of the rock wall. "What?" she asked, noticing his gaze. "Just thinking how different you look from the woman I pulled out of that collapsed tunnel. There's color in your cheeks again." She smiled, the simple expression transforming her face. "It helps to be here voluntarily with proper supports and—" She hesitated, then finished softly, "with someone I trust." The lantern light caught the copper highlights in her auburn hair, and Garrett was struck by a sudden, overwhelming desire to touch it. Before he could stop himself, he reached out to tuck a loose strand behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek. "Lily," he began, uncertain what he meant to say. A shout from further down the tunnel shattered the moment. "Mr. Preston, Miss Jensen, you'd better come see this." They hurried toward Sam's voice, finding him at the end of their excavation, excitement evident in every line of his body. "We've broken through to a natural cavity," he explained, pointing his lantern into a small opening. "And there's something you need to see." Garrett helped widen the opening enough for them to pass through, then assisted Lily through the gap. On the other side, their lanterns revealed a sight that drew gasps from both of them, a natural chamber where the mountain had split, revealing a wall glittering with silver ore so rich it seemed to capture and multiply the lantern light. "My God," Lily whispered. "It's beautiful." "And valuable," Garrett added, examining the vein that ran from floor to ceiling. "This is what your father found, his insurance policy." Lily turned to him, tears shining in her eyes. "This changes everything." In that moment of triumph, surrounded by the wealth they'd discovered together, Garrett gave in to the impulse he'd been fighting for weeks. He pulled Lily into his arms and kissed her, feeling her initial surprise melt into warm response as her hands came up to frame his face. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Sam was studiously examining the opposite wall, giving them privacy. "I'm sorry," Garrett said, though his expression belied the apology. "That was presumptuous." "Yes, it was," Lily agreed, but she was smiling, and long overdue. The discovery of what came to be called the Jensen-Preston vein transformed both the mine's prospects and the partners' relationship. They kept the find relatively quiet at first, extracting enough ore to prove its value without attracting undue attention. Lily used her father's connections to secure a favorable contract with a smelter in Carson City, ensuring they maintained control of the operation rather than selling out to larger interests. As autumn approached, the mine was showing consistent profits, and Lily had hired a capable foreman to oversee daily operations, allowing her to focus on the business aspects. Garrett, meanwhile, had purchased land on the outskirts of Riverton and begun building a modest house, his first permanent home since leaving Texas as a youth. Their courtship progressed with the same blend of caution and chemistry that characterized their business partnership. Garrett was mindful of Lily's reputation in town, conducting their relationship with a propriety that sometimes tested his self-control. For her part, Lily balanced her growing feelings for Garrett with her determination to remain independent, a woman respected for her own accomplishments, rather than defined by her relationship. On a crisp October evening, with the aspen leaves turning gold on the mountainsides, Garrett invited Lily to dinner at his partially completed house. He'd arranged for Mrs. Palmer to chaperone, sitting discreetly in the adjacent room with her knitting to avoid giving the town gossips additional material. The simple meal of venison stew and fresh bread was served at a table set near the large window that would eventually overlook a garden. Garrett had planned every detail carefully, from the candles to the wildflowers arranged in a ceramic vase. "This is lovely," Lily said, looking around the space that still smelled of fresh-cut lumber. "I can see it taking shape. It's going to be a beautiful home." "It's missing something essential," Garrett replied, his usual confidence giving way to uncharacteristic nervousness. "Curtains," Lily suggested with a teasing smile. "Mrs. Palmer mentioned offering you some of her spare fabric, not curtains." He reached across the table to take her hand. Lily, when I rode into Riverton that day, I had no intention of staying. I'd spent so many years moving from place to place, never looking back, never putting down roots. Her fingers tightened around his. And now I can't imagine being anywhere else, or with anyone else. He drew a deep breath. I'm building this house for us, Lily, if you'll have me. Her eyes widened. Garrett, are you proposing? Not very skillfully, it seems. He smiled ruefully, then stood and came around the table to kneel beside her chair. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet pouch. Lily Jensen, you are the strongest, most brilliant woman I've ever known. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? He opened the pouch to reveal a ring, not an ordinary gold band, but one fashioned from silver extracted from their mine, set with a small but perfect diamond. Lily's hands trembled as she touched the ring. You had this made from our silver? I thought it fitting, our future built on what we discovered together. He searched her face anxiously. Is that a yes? Yes, she whispered, tears spilling onto her cheeks. Of course it's yes. From the next room came the sound of Mrs. Palmer blowing her nose loudly into a handkerchief, reminding them they weren't entirely alone. They both laughed, breaking the emotional tension of the moment. Garrett slipped the ring onto Lily's finger, then drew her to her feet and into a kiss that promised much more once they no longer required a chaperone. They were married in Riverton's small church 2 weeks before Christmas, with most of the town in attendance. The miners presented them with a silver platter engraved with the date and their names. Mrs. Palmer cried through the entire ceremony. Even Collins managed to look pleased beneath his perpetual scowl. Winter settled over Riverton, bringing heavy snows that occasionally limited operations at the mine, but could not dampen the newlyweds' happiness. They moved into the completed house, which Lily had helped finish with her practical eye for detail and comfort. Their evenings were spent planning the mine's expansion, reading by the fire, or simply enjoying each other's company after years of solitude for them both. Spring brought new beginnings in more ways than one. As the mountain snows melted and wildflowers began carpeting the meadows, Lily confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks: they were expecting a child. Garrett's reaction to the news was everything Lily could have hoped for. His face transformed with wonder, then joy, then a fierce protectiveness that made her laugh and cry simultaneously. A baby, he said, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. Our baby. Due in November, according to Dr. Morris, Lily told him, covering his hand with her own. He says I'm in excellent health and should have no complications. Garrett pulled her close. I never thought I'd have a family of my own, he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. After my parents, I just never believed it was in the cards for me. Life has a way of surprising us, Lily replied, thinking of how close she'd come to death in that dark tunnel, and how that disaster had ultimately led to her greatest happiness. As her pregnancy progressed, Lily gradually stepped back from direct involvement in the mine's operations, focusing instead on the administrative and financial aspects that could be managed from her desk at home. Garrett took on more responsibility for the day-to-day running of the business, proving himself as adept at management as he was at practical mining. Their success attracted attention from larger mining interests, with several offers to buy them out for substantial sums. They declined each time, committed to building something that would last a legacy for their child and potentially future generations. In late November, as the first snows of winter returned to blanket Riverton, Lily gave birth to a son after a long but uncomplicated labor. They named him Thomas, after Lily's father, with the middle name James to honor Garrett's long-deceased father. Holding his son for the first time, Garrett experienced a completeness he had never imagined possible. The tiny being with Lily's auburn hair and his own cleft chin represented everything he had gained since that fateful day he'd ridden into town: purpose, love, family, home. He's perfect, Garrett whispered, carefully returning the sleeping infant to Lily's arms. Just like his mother. Flatterer, she said with a tired smile, though I won't argue about his perfection. As Thomas grew, so did the Preston Jensen Mining Company. By his first birthday, they had expanded to 3 productive shafts, employed over 50 men, and contributed substantially to Riverton's growth and prosperity. Their home had been enlarged to accommodate not only their family but frequent business meetings and social gatherings. Lily had fully recovered her strength and divided her time between motherhood and business affairs, often wearing Thomas in a sling while reviewing accounts or meeting with potential investors. The arrangement raised eyebrows among more traditional visitors, but those who knew Lily understood that her roles as mother, wife, and businesswoman were equally important to her identity. Garrett, meanwhile, had become a respected figure in Riverton and throughout the territory. His expertise in mining safety led to his appointment on a territorial commission developing regulations to prevent accidents like the one that had nearly claimed Lily's life. The work took him away from home occasionally, but never for long. He had promised Lily after Thomas's birth that he would never become the kind of absent father he himself had known. On a warm summer evening, as Thomas toddled around the garden under Lily's watchful eye, Garrett returned from a 3-day trip to Carson City with news that would once again alter their future. The territorial governor is recommending Nevada adopt the most comprehensive mining safety regulations in the country, he announced, swinging Thomas into his arms for a welcome home hug. And he wants our operation to serve as the model. Lily's eyes widened. That's wonderful news. For the miners, for the industry, for everything we've been working toward. There's more, Garrett said, setting Thomas down with a toy horse to occupy him. He's also proposed establishing a school of mining engineering in Carson City, and he's offered me a position as an instructor. Carson City, Lily repeated, digesting the implications. That would mean leaving Riverton, leaving the mine. We could keep our ownership interest, Garrett said carefully, having already considered this aspect. Collins has proven himself capable of managing day-to-day operations. And you could continue overseeing the financial side. Lily was silent for a moment, gazing at their son as she considered the proposition. What about our home? Everything we've built here. We'd build something new, Garrett said simply. Together, as we've done before. He took her hands. But only if it's what you want to. This decision belongs to both of us. She studied his face, seeing the excitement he was trying to contain for her sake. This matters to you, sharing your knowledge, helping prevent other accidents. It does, he admitted, but you and Thomas matter more. If you prefer to stay in Riverton, we stay. Lily thought of the frightened young woman she had been 3 years ago, desperately trying to hold onto her father's mine as her only security. How different her life had become, not because of the silver they'd discovered, but because of the partnership she'd formed with the man before her. Carson City has better schools for Thomas as he grows, she said thoughtfully. And better opportunities for expanding our business interests beyond just mining. Hope kindled in Garrett's eyes. You're considering it, more than considering. She smiled, decision made. I think it's the right move for our family, for our future. Garrett pulled her into his arms, relief and gratitude evident in his embrace. Have I told you lately how much I love you, Lily Preston? Not since breakfast, she teased, leaning up to kiss him, but I believe you've just demonstrated it rather convincingly. Thomas toddled over to tug at their legs, demanding inclusion in the moment. Garrett swept him up, and the three of them stood in the garden as the sun began its descent behind the mountains, a family forged in crisis, strengthened by shared purpose, and bound by a love neither had been looking for, but both had found in the heart of the Nevada wilderness. 5 years later, the Prestons had firmly established themselves in Carson City society. Their handsome home on a tree-lined street housed not only Garrett, Lily, and now 7-year-old Thomas, but also 3-year-old twins Elizabeth and Catherine, spirited girls who had inherited their mother's auburn hair and their father's determined nature. The Nevada School of Mining Engineering had grown under Garrett's guidance, becoming one of the most respected institutions of its kind in the Western Territories. Lily had expanded her business interests to include investments in several successful ventures beyond mining, while maintaining their ownership stake in the Riverton operation, which continued to produce steady returns. On the anniversary of the mine collapse that had brought them together, They always observed a private remembrance not of the fear and darkness, but of the strength and hope that had emerged from those 3 days of desperate digging. It had become a tradition to take the children to a special outlook above Carson City, where the distant mountains reminded them of Riverton and the extraordinary circumstances that had led to their family's creation. "Tell us the story again, Papa," Elizabeth requested as they spread a picnic blanket on the grassy overlook. "About how you rescued Mama from the mountain." Thomas, who had heard the tale many times, pretended sophisticated disinterest while obviously listening for his favorite parts. Catherine, the more sensitive of the twins, nestled against Lily's side, already anticipating the scary moments of being trapped underground. Garrett exchanged a smile with Lily, then began the familiar narrative. "I was just a drifter passing through a small mining town called Riverton." As he recounted the story carefully edited for young ears, but retaining the essential truth of determination and hope, Lily watched her family with quiet wonder. The man who had once avoided roots now anchored their lives with his steadfast presence. The children who might never have been born if not for his refusal to give up on a stranger trapped beneath a mountain. "And when I finally broke through the rock and held my lantern up," Garrett continued, reaching the dramatic climax, "there was your mother, brave and beautiful even after 3 days in the darkness. And then you fell in love," Elizabeth stated with 7-year-old certainty. Garrett's eyes met Lily's over their children's heads. "Not quite that fast," he said with a smile, "but when the right person comes along, sometimes your heart recognizes them even before your mind catches up." "That's silly, Papa," Thomas declared with boyish practicality. "Hearts can't recognize anything, they just pump blood." "Ah, but that's where you're wrong, son," Garrett replied, ruffling the boy's hair. "The heart knows things the mind can't explain. Someday you'll understand." As the children ran off to explore the meadow under Garrett's watchful eye, Lily leaned back on the blanket, grateful for the life that had emerged from what could have been her end. The mine collapse, terrifying as it had been, had ultimately led her not to darkness but to light, not to isolation but to family. "Penny, for your thoughts," Garrett asked, returning to sit beside her. "Just reflecting on how differently things might have turned out," Lily replied. "If you hadn't ridden into Riverton that day, someone else would have helped with the rescue," he said with characteristic modesty. Lily shook her head. "Perhaps, but they wouldn't have been you." She took his hand, the silver ring he'd given her still gleaming on her finger alongside her wedding band. "And I can't imagine a life without you in it." Garrett's expression softened as he looked at the woman who had transformed him from a drifter to a man with purpose and deep roots. "Luckiest wrong turn I ever took," he said, leaning in to kiss her gently. "Lucky indeed," Lily agreed, thinking not of the silver that had secured their financial future, but of the true treasure she had found, a love worth waiting for, worth digging for, worth building a life around. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the meadow where their children played, Lily and Garrett Preston sat hand in hand. Their shared past a foundation for a future neither could have imagined in those desperate days beneath the mountain, a future built not just on survival, but on joy, purpose, and an enduring love that had proven stronger than the very earth itself.